Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Yesterday we went through and provided a full performance breakdown and review of Intel's new Core i7-10875H processor, which is the key new CPU in their 10th gen lineup for laptops. But something else also launched at the same time, another interesting new component for these high-performance mobile devices, and that is Nvidia's RTX Super series. So we'll be covering at least one of these new GPUs in today's video. It's taken Nvidia quite some time to bring their Super lineup from desktop across to mobile form factors. The first RTX Super GPUs in the RTX 2060 Super and RTX 2070 Super launched in July 2019, so a 9-month wait here is a bit long for my liking, but nevertheless the lineup here is here as we discussed in our news video a couple of weeks ago. I'm not going to go through all of the new features Nvidia is introducing with this series again. Go back and watch the news announcement video if you're interested in a full breakdown, but I do think it's worth refreshing ourselves on the lineup itself. We aren't getting an RTX 2060 Super in this launch, but we do get the RTX 2080 Super and RTX 2070 Super, along with the new GTX 1650 Ti. The focus of this video is the RTX 2070 Super and specifically the Max-Q variants, which are once again a key part of Nvidia's lineup. While the RTX 2070 Super is available in a range of TGPs, the maximum 115W variant typically lacks Max-Q branding and is instead referred to as Max-P. Meanwhile, the lower power targets like 80W and 90W get a Max-Q designation and feature lower clocks as a result. As you can imagine, having all of these different variants and power limits under the one GPU name is pretty confusing, and it's something I continue to be very frustrated with. Just take a look at all these GPUs that are called RTX 2070 these days. Not only do we have two desktop GPUs, which are different to the laptop models in terms of performance, we then have another two Max-P laptop variants and at least 4 Max-Q models. Some are super, some are not super, some are Max-Q, some are not. The power targets aren't often advertised either, but whether you end up with an 80W or 90W Max-Q version does have performance implications. So this whole thing here is a bit of a mess. It hasn't really changed much from last generation, so I don't want to rant too much more on this, but I really would like this whole thing to be improved in terms of naming. So what are the highlights in the lineup? Like with previous generations, Nvidia's desktop and mobile GPUs have the same CUDA core counts. So the RTX 2070 Super for laptops features the same TU104 GPU with 2560 CUDA cores. However, clock speeds are different. Even when looking at the Max-P variant at 115W, the mobile model has a 29% lower base clock and 22% lower rated boost clock, so naturally it'll perform far below an RTX 2070 Super desktop GPU, and that's something we'll explore in a future video. But it's not hugely surprising given the desktop card is rated for 215W. We also get the same memory subsystem, and that includes 8GB of GDDR6 at 14 gigabits per second. Max-Q models are clocked lower again, with the 80W model coming in at a 930MHz base and 1155MHz boost. Our test laptop also supports a 90W configuration, and while it doesn't alter the rated clocks, typically it delivers 120 to 150MHz higher clocks while gaming or thereabouts. Our understanding is that laptops that default to 90W will feature 150MHz higher base clocks, and as with all modern Nvidia GPUs, while the rated boost clock is listed at, say, 1155MHz, due to GPU boost algorithms, the actual in-game clock speeds tend to be much higher, so these specifications are really only a guideline. As I mentioned, today's review is focusing on RTX 2070 Super Max-Q performance, what a name, in both the 80W and the 90W configurations, and I'm hoping to look at other new GPUs, including Max-P variants, in future videos. The test laptop I have in for today is the Gigabyte Aorus 15G, same unit from my Core i7-10875H CPU analysis, so as you might have guessed, the CPU here is the Core i7-10875H. One of the complications with this generation is we're getting both a CPU and GPU upgrade at the same time, as all RTX Super laptops will feature new 10th gen CPUs. Ideally, I'd love to be checking these GPUs out when paired with the Core i7-10750H, which is much closer to the Core i7-9750H used with many gaming laptops previously, and that would remove the CPU as a variable as best as possible. But right now, that's just not possible, so we're sticking to mostly heavy GPU limited benchmarks throughout this video. As always, testing laptops apples to apples is a bit of a nightmare, but we are hoping to test more laptops than ever this generation, so this is just the start of what will be a comprehensive look at mobile performance in the coming months. The Aorus 15G also packs 16GB of DDR4 2933 memory and a 1080p 240Hz display. Unfortunately, two of the new features Nvidia were touting at the RTX Super laptop launch are not included in this unit. We aren't getting Dynamic Boost or Advanced Optimus here, so that's something we'll have to test later. Nvidia said most laptops will use these features, so it's a bit disappointing the very first unit we test includes neither, and hopefully this isn't a sign of the broader ecosystem. Strangely, the pre-release Nvidia drivers that we used for this review also list our RTX 2070 Super Max-Q as a non-Max-Q model in the control panel. But this is incorrect. The listed clock speeds and power targets are identical to Max-Q models, and Gigabyte themselves list this laptop as having a Max-Q GPU on their website, so I think this is just a bug, but it's worth mentioning nonetheless. As with all our laptop testing, we try and lock down variables as much as possible. This means keeping the CPU at Intel's default settings unless otherwise specified, and same with the GPU. We don't use any included OEM utilities to overclock these GPUs. This review is designed to show stock performance with a given power configuration, although some OEMs like Gigabyte in this instance allow you to choose power targets. I think many other OEMs will do similar, so we're showing both 80 watts and 90 watt performance throughout this review to give you the clearest idea of how this GPU will perform in a variety of configurations. CPU and GPU power is listed for every configuration tested in the coming benchmarks, and you can find the full list of laptops we used in the description below. Alright, we're going to kick this one off with a fairly standard game in Far Cry 5. Here you can see quite a bunching of results with all of the RTX 2070 series GPUs I've tested, and you'll probably spot the RTX 2080 Max-Q peeking out from the middle there too. Looking at average frame rates, the RTX 2070 Super Max-Q in its 80 watt configuration is just barely ahead of the RTX 2070 at 115 watts, which I guess in itself is impressive as it does beat the 90 watt RTX 2070 Max-Q, which fell below the RTX 2070. But realistically, when you look at all of these results, whether you get an RTX 2070 Max-Q through the RTX 2080 Max-Q, it doesn't matter too much as the difference between the best and worst results is just 6% using ultra settings. What about in Battlefield 5, again using ultra settings at 1080p? The story here isn't too different, although this time both configurations of the RTX 2070 Super Max-Q aren't as fast as the 115 watt RTX 2070, falling 3 to 6% behind. The 80 watt configuration is also slower than the RTX 2080 Max-Q, but the margins here are similar to the RTX 2070 at just single digits. Let's look now at Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which is a more GPU intensive game than the previous two and allows the power of the RTX 2070 Super GPU to be unleashed. This is one of the strongest results for RTX 2070 Super Max-Q versus RTX 2070 Max-Q, both at 90 watts, which is the configuration I have available to me. With this configuration, the new Super GPU is 13% faster, and impressively, even the 80 watt variant is faster. This allows the 2070 Super Max-Q to come in 4% faster than the 115 watt RTX 2070, despite consuming just 80 watts of power, an impressive result in a mobile form factor. Resident Evil 2 using balanced settings also played nicely on the RTX 2070 Super Max-Q at well over 100 FPS. Here we see an 11% performance gain over the RTX 2070 Max-Q and a 2% lead over the RTX 2070. However, frame rates don't quite keep up to the RTX 2080 Max-Q in this game. The larger GPU is better here at the same 80 watt power limit. Metro Exodus is a very GPU intensive title, and again we see quite a large bunching of results for all the RTX 2070 class GPUs. The 80 watt numbers for the 2070 Super Max-Q aren't overly impressive, 2% slower than the RTX 2070, however this does flip over to a performance lead at 90 watts. In fact, this game saw one of the largest gains for increasing the power limit at 6%, which allows it to be just under 5% faster than the RTX 2070 when all said and done. However, when comparing 90 watt numbers to the 90 watt RTX 2070 Max-Q, we're not seeing much of a gain, just a 1% improvement to average frame rates. Control is a very GPU demanding title at 1080p using high settings, and here we're testing without RTX features If you choose to enable DLSS, of course, you will see better performance than what we show here. The 80W configuration of the 2070 Super Max Q ends up nearly 10% behind the RTX 2070, but benefits from an 11% performance increase when up to 90W, allowing it to edge slightly ahead of the more power-hungry last-gen configuration. This isn't a bad result from a lower power draw part. Borderlands 3 is another title where it's only at 90W can the RTX 2070 Super Max Q match the performance of the RTX 2070, while falling about 5% behind when we compare 80W 2070 Super Max Q to 80W 2080 Max Q. These names are pretty confusing, but I guess that's just where we're at with modern gaming laptop GPUs. Red Dead Redemption 2 is naturally a very popular title on PC, and the performance story is very similar to some of the games we've just been looking at. The 80W configuration of the 2070 Super Max Q is slower on average than an RTX 2070, but faster when we up that to 90W. And surprisingly, this is one of the few games I tested where the 80W 2070 Super Max Q is actually faster than the 2080 Max Q running at the same power limit. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order plays nicely with the RTX 2070 Super Max Q, with both power variants clocking in 2 to 4% faster than the standard RTX 2070 for laptops. It's not quite as fast as the RTX 2080 Super Max Q, but I think performance is good in this game either way, even using the Epic preset. Grand Theft Auto 5 is the last title we'll be taking an in-depth look at, representing an older but still popular game. There's not much here that we haven't already talked about. Performance margins are slim between all the GPUs we've been discussing, and that's no different here really. The 80W 2070 Super Max Q is 2% behind the RTX 2070, but 2% ahead at 90W. This is one of the rare titles where the new Super GPU is slower than the non-Super model, but I believe some of that is down to a CPU limitation. The game does benefit from faster CPUs at these sorts of frame rates. Now it's time to work through some performance breakdowns. I'll start here with the RTX 2070 Super Max Q versus the RTX 2070 Max Q, both at 90W in GPU limited games. On average, the new Super GPU was 7% faster under the same power limit, but this varied between titles. Some games weren't faster by much, others were up to 15% faster. I guess it depends how the game itself uses the resources and whether the game prefers core frequency or core count. Interestingly though, the 80W variant of the RTX 2070 Super Max Q is still faster than the 90W RTX 2070 Max Q we tested. Not in all games, and not by much, but a 3% improvement on average is respectable and points to a small gain in efficiency from the larger CUDA-core array with its slightly reduced clocks. Speaking of 80W versus 90W, here is how the higher power variant stacks up. In some titles, we saw as much as an 11% performance gain, but in others, gains were more modest. On average, we ended up with just a 3 to 4% performance improvement from the higher power limit, which is a little bit lower than the gains seen from higher power limits in previous generations. The 90W RTX 2080 Max Q, for example, is 7% faster than the 80W configuration on average when we reviewed it back in early 2019. The jump up to this new Super model has allowed the RTX 2070 class Max Q variant to pull much closer to the regular RTX 2070 running at 115W. When consuming just 80W of power, the RTX 2070 Super Max Q is just 2% slower on average, with some games showing it to be faster and others slower. In our previous testing, the 80W RTX 2070 Max Q was around 10% slower, sometimes more. We're still talking about RTX 2070 Super versus RTX 2070 here, so Nvidia has needed to step up a GPU tier to achieve this performance parity at a lower power target. At 90W, the RTX 2070 Super Max Q is able to pull ahead of the RTX 2070 on average, but only just. The low power Max Q model isn't always the faster GPU, but in a lot of the most GPU demanding titles, it tends to perform quite well here, so I'd be hoping most people buying a laptop with this GPU inside end up getting the 90W configuration. The RTX 2070 Super Max Q still has its place in the lineup though. It fell 3% behind the RTX 2080 Max Q on average, so we're not quite able to replace last generation higher tier products with a lower tier design. All the margins here are quite tight though, so we're talking very slim gains or losses in most situations. On a more positive note, the RTX 2070 Super Max Q does provide considerably more performance than the RTX 2060 when both are configured to 80W. The new Super GPU is 18% faster on average, which suggests it is by far the more efficient GPU design here. After testing all of these GPUs, what's become clear is just how crowded Nvidia's lineup has become at the top end. With so many RTX 2070 class GPUs in the mix, plus RTX 2080 and now the new RTX 2080 Super, the gains you get from moving up a GPU bracket are very, very small most of the time. From the RTX 2060 to RTX 2070 Max-Q, you're looking at about a 10% gain, but then above that it's all incremental single-digit improvements. This is going to make buying a new Nvidia RTX laptop pretty difficult given the pricing for Max-Q and non-Max-Q models tends to be all over the place. I think it will be easier with this generation than with any previous generation to waste money on incremental upgrades, especially when last-gen models are still available and thrown into the mix. I think finding that sweet value proposition point is going to be quite a tricky task. Let's keep things as simple as possible though. Nvidia says that the RTX 2070 Super is replacing the RTX 2070 in the market at roughly the same price points. This means that for the same money, you're getting a 7% performance improvement or thereabouts, even when compared to today's pricing for what is now last-gen systems. That's not a groundbreaking performance improvement, especially when CPU performance hasn't improved much in the mid-tier with these new 10th gen CPUs, but at least at launch, these new laptops aren't providing worse value than existing last-gen options, which is what happened last time. That could change with deep discounts, but Nvidia shifting the lineup down to fit in these new Super GPUs is a good move, even if the performance gains aren't that amazing at only single digits. The RTX 2070 will continue to exist in the market, now replacing the RTX 2060 in that price tier, so it will be possible to choose between RTX 2070 Max-Q and RTX 2070 Super Max-Q models. Gigabyte's Aero 15, for example, is available with either GPU plus an i7-10750H. The RTX 2070 Max-Q model is $1,900 and the 2070 Super Max-Q is $2,100. So that's an 11% increase in price for 7% more performance on average, or up to 15% in the best cases. Again, nothing earth-shattering, but at least the pricing structure for this new laptop generation is pretty close to making sense. The complication, as always, will come when people are tossing up between Max-Q and non-Max-Q laptops. The RTX 2070 Super Max-Q is providing similar performance to the 115-watt RTX 2070, which is neat from an efficiency sense, but not as nice when exploring value. Laptops that use the full 2070 will be quite a bit cheaper. MSI's GE76 is one example at $1,800, which is about 15% less than 2070 Super Max-Q laptops like the Aero 15, and there are even cheaper models available if you're just after something basic. This new pricing structure doesn't solve the value disparity between Max-Q and non-Max-Q GPUs. Max-Q is always going to be worse value, but that's the premium that you pay for slimmer, nicer, more portable machines. Then there are some edge cases where companies will replace the full RTX 2070 with an RTX 2070 Super Max-Q. That's what happened with the Gigabyte Aorus 15. The model that I previously looked at, the Aorus 15XA, packed the Max-P RTX 2070 at 115 watts, and that was priced at around $2,200. The Aorus 15G XB unit that I looked at for this video swaps that out for the RTX 2070 Super Max-Q up to 90 watts, which is only slightly faster in games, even when the CPU has received an upgrade from 6 to 8 cores. Unless you also need improved productivity performance, that sort of upgrade isn't very enticing for gamers, and I hope we don't see more examples of companies putting Max-Q GPUs into previous non-Max-Q designs. If the cooler is capable of handling a 115-watt GPU, the more sensible option would have been upgrading to a Max-P RTX 2070 Super, or keeping the RTX 2070 but reducing the price. I should also note that the Aorus 15 I tested has neither Dynamic Boost or Advanced Optimus, the two new features Nvidia are pushing this generation. These have the potential to further improve performance, and they're kind of cool features as well, so what we've talked about today is more of a baseline. We'll have to explore how these features work in a future video when we get different laptops in for testing. All up, the RTX 2070 Super Max-Q isn't a very exciting GPU to be honest, which isn't all that surprising considering Nvidia's lackluster super launch on the desktop last year. It's not a bad GPU, the updates to pricing are welcome and some of the other technologies we're getting this generation look neat, but in terms of pure performance, the needle hasn't been shifted too much here. The excitement with 2020 laptops really does lie with AMD's new Ryzen APUs and a few other incremental technology improvements. For example, Nvidia's advanced Optimus looks pretty neat, new 300Hz displays, and also these nice mechanical key switches in the Aorus laptop that I tested. Until we see new architectures from Nvidia or AMD in the GPU space, unfortunately performance will remain at a bit of a standstill. And that's it for this look at the ridiculously named Nvidia GeForce RTX 2070 Super Max Q. And boy, am I sick of saying some combination of those words throughout this review. I'm sure you guys are sick of it as well. Nvidia, there's too many words in this product name. You've got to shorten this down somehow, figure out a way to make your product lineup a bit more simple to digest for general buyers. But yeah, anyway, definitely sick of saying those names. As always, you can subscribe for more laptop and mobile GPU testing. We'll be going through hopefully the rest of the new Nvidia lineup and perhaps revisiting some of the other GPUs as well in the coming weeks, so definitely subscribe for that. Big shout out to all our Patreon members as well who support the channel directly. If you want to get involved, links to that are in the description below, and I'll catch you in the next one.